On the spiritual part, we're doing this spiritual and temporal part of emergency preparedness this year. So on the spiritual part for gardening, the Savior worked with his parables were a lot dealing with earth and gardening and growing and harvesting and planting a lot. So he plants the truth, which is the word of God. He nurtures growth through light, grace, and guidance. He harvests according to effort and conditions, which is the law of the harvest. So I want to just kind of briefly go through a couple of the different parables or focuses that he has. One is the parable of the sower. So the condition of our soil matters, right? Seeds fall on all different kinds of soils, and the ones that are the most, the best soils produce the best products on that. So applying that to emergency, preparing the soil, we have to have knowledge and planning. Removing weeds. So in our lives, we need to remove distractions, maybe debt, clutter. And to protect growth, we need to have routine and discipline in our lives. The Savior also talks about faith like a grain of a mustard seed. And again, it's starting small and growing into something quite large. So emergency preparedness, again, starts with maybe a small garden bed. Or having a few stored meals, maybe developing one skill like bread making or water storage, and growth comes line upon line, little by little. He also talks in John 15 about I am the vine, so we need to stay connected to him. Emergency application for this is in stress or disaster, spiritual stability equals emotional stability. There's a direct connection with that. Staying connected to Christ helps us reduce panic, increases clarity in the decision-making, and strengthens family unity. The Savior also talks about the wheat and the tares. So we need to, in an emergency situation, we need to be discriminate in a crisis. So many times in emergencies, misinformation starts spreading around. Fear, poor choices spread quickly. So we must learn to recognize truth versus panic and focus on what's actually sustaining life and developing, like President Nelson has told us, of developing that spiritual part, being able to listen to the Holy Ghost and understanding those promptings. And that is going to be crucial in the latter days, whatever the emergency happens to be. We've got to have that connection. The Savior also talks about pruning and letting go of something to make something else stronger. So an emergency application for that is simplifying life is part of preparation. So if we're encumbered about by much, it doesn't help with being prepared very well. Reduce excess spending, cut unnecessary commitments, and focus on the essentials, which are food, family, and faith. And the last one I wanted to talk about was the one that I personally like, is the law of the harvest. So these are the preparedness principles with this. The Lord tells us that whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that's from Galatians. And the emergency application for that is you cannot harvest what you don't plant. Food storage, gardening, and skill building must happen before the crisis. And small daily efforts such as planting seeds, learning skills, compound over time. Again, it's that little by little. And gardening is a great way to practice that, because I'm sure Malie will talk about that, but you start doing something and then that didn't work out, and you try something again next year that's a little bit different. So I wanted to tell you about what I had an experience kind of with the law of the harvest. Is I had a neighbor that had the beautiful poppies, and I really liked those poppies. But in Alpine, you can't pick them. You're not supposed to do that, but she had them in her yard. So I go, can I get some seeds? So I got some seeds, and that year, probably this time, well, a little bit later, because it has to form the seed pods. But then I germinated them, and I put them in little containers to grow. And so by the end of the year, they were small, but I go, I think they're going to make it for the winter. So I put them out in the winter. The next year, they all just grew bigger, but nothing happened. This year is the year that I actually have poppies. That's 3 years. And asparagus is another thing that takes forever, But it's the law of the harvest that in our society is not taught very well. It's like, I want it now. You go to McDonald's, give me my whole meal. And the Savior doesn't work that way. It's little by little, and progressing step by step, and willing to plant the seed, and we can go do other things in life, but knowing that it's planted and we can come and nurture it every once in a while, but it is doing its process in helping us and it grow. Okay, so that's my little poppy thing. So Sister Sorensen I brought you some snacks. So when we have some snacks while we visit here, it's poppy seed bread. So there's a container and some napkins go on that side. Container napkins go on this side. Sorry, remote people, you missed out on that one. Okay, so before we dive into Malise, the book that we've been using here is Be Prepared, Not Scared. Hopefully people have gotten that. I recommend that highly. She talks in there about in an emergency situation, what to do first. Like if we have an emergency, depending again on what the emergency is, well, actually, I'm going to go a step back. The time to start preparing to grow your own food in an emergency is today, not later. We're already late, right? We're on it today. Not when the power goes out or fuel shortages have stopped and the trucks stop delivering food. Gardening is a skill much like being able to shoot a gun accurately. Gardening is much more than simply scattering some seeds, watering them a bit, waiting a few days, and then harvesting some food. It takes time to prepare the land, nourish the soil, purchase or save seeds, and grow the seeds. You also need to do things that work, make mistakes sometimes, and realize the good and the bad, and learn from them to become a better gardener year after year after year. So it does take some time, but it's extremely rewarding, especially that law of the harvest when I'm in my garden or out working, even pulling weeds. Many times scriptures come into my head and I feel like I'm being taught because I'm working with Mother Earth, who has a spirit, right? And we're directly connected there. So in the book, Be Prepared, Not Scared, she talks about if the emergency happens, just start sprouting some seeds, okay? So I have a little container here. This is about 3 days old, and I stuck it in the refrigerator. But it's just basically wheat that I've sprouted. If anyone wants to know how to sprout, it's really quite easy. Just Google that, or just water, dump it a couple of the times a day, and you got it coming. But when you sprout, it releases vitamin C. It builds vitamin C. You can get vitamin A, C, E, B complexes, protein, enzymes, a lot of things once it has sprouted. And you can add that to salads and soups and other things, but you're getting that nutrition of something. So she says first day you want to start some sprouts. And then day 3 to 7, you're going to do some more sprouts. So there's some kind of rotation there. And then you're just rotating them as you go. That provides you for your ability to clean out your refrigerator the first couple of days, which you may not have power, but you're eating the fresh fruits and vegetables at that point. And then that's all gone. You're going to be able to start accessing some powerhouse nutritional things there. There's a quote that says, high nutritional density, sprouts are considered a superfood with nutrients sometimes 10 times higher than the original seed, offering a massive health boost when fresh food is scarce. Fast and easy production, they grow in as little as 3 to 5 days using only water and a jar, making them an excellent choice for immediate low-maintenance food production in an in-house condition. So if you couldn't go outside and do gardening, then you can have gardening inside. So I brought that. Making lids is really easy, canning lid with a little screening, little glue, way to go. And then also wheatgrass. I didn't get it high enough. I didn't plant it quite soon enough. But wheatgrass is also one of those things that are actually extremely good for you. And so being able to do some in this and then have wheatgrass growing that you could add to salads and other things. Okay. Did I do it? I think we've got it. So we're going to rest the time over to Malie. And she is a master gardener. We're so lucky to have her in our stake to be able to share her knowledge. She's probably going to share this much information but she's knowledgeable. So we'll pick her brain if we can at the end.
If anybody knows how to connect the computer to the TV, I would love you to work on that. If not, we'll just talk. I have some wonderful pictures on here to show you if somebody is able to do that. Anybody know how to do that? Do you know how to do it? I'll let her do it then, unless you don't know. Yes, okay.
We're going to have you hook that on. Can I hook it on for you? Is that
Yes,
right?
please.
Okay, I'm going to be over here with her.
There's that. Okay.
Do you need that?
You can let her use that. I will use this one for a second. Okay, first of all, I am not a master gardener. So in the actual master gardeners, I have not gone through that training, but I'll tell you where I learned gardening. So my name's Malie, and I am in the Northfield 7th Ward, and I've lived in Utah for 20 years, but I lived in California before this. And my ex-husband, before we got married, he went and secretly bought a house. And when we got married, he's like, look, ta-da, we have a house. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it had fruit trees on it. And my mom had been a gardener for most of my life. And I thought, I want to grow tomatoes. So I went and I planted a tomato right into the ground, and it promptly died. And that started since 1991. I have been an avid, fanatical gardener since then. But it was that first tomato that was my first try. So gardening has some benefits that that you guys know, and some issues, right? Some things that detract from gardening. So now I have all of my sources on the PowerPoint, but let me tell you a couple of sources. Number one, I actually have a YouTube channel. That channel is called Garden Wise Adventures, and I have a beginning gardener playlist. So if you look at YouTube and look under the playlists on my channel, I can't remember how many, something like 20 to 30 videos about beginning gardening. And I also have many others. What? Garden Wise Adventures? Yes, Garden Wise Adventures. So a lot of this will be covered in detail in those videos. Oh, yay! Perfect. Okay. So, yes. Okay, now to figure out how to do this. Okay. So, don't pay attention to the Waterwise designers. Let me finish my introduction. So once I moved to Utah, I had a 1/4 acre property rather than the small city lot that we had in California, and I decided I was just going to turn it all over into food. And it's pretty much what I've done. When I was 48 years old, I decided to go back to school. I was going to be very responsible and be an accountant. Then I found out that BYU Provo had a landscape management program. Through all caution to the wind, and have my bachelor's now in landscape management, was a little responsible and have a minor in business. And then immediately at 52 years old, I went and started a high-end landscape maintenance business where I went out with my crew of 6 and we maintained a bunch of high-end properties in Alpine and Highland. After that, I decided I was getting too old to do that because mowing and hedging, all that kind of stuff was getting too tiring. So I started a design business. So my design business concentrated on water efficient landscapes and edible landscapes. So that is my background, and I am just an avid gardener. I love it more than just about anything. Okay, so there's my YouTube channel right there. And so the question, why should you learn to garden? Today we talked a little bit about it. The church has said we should be prepared. What are other reasons to garden? Yes?
It tastes so much better.
It tastes so much better, yes.
Stress relief.
That is one of the on my list, major stress relief, yes. For some people, it's a stress relief. We're going to talk about that too. And it can bring your family together. If you take your kids out there or your spouse and you learn to garden together, it's something you can do together and build together.
So gardening is very important. Also, it helps you become self-sufficient. Now, you are not going to be completely self-sufficient on what you can grow, especially on our urban lots, right? But you can become sufficient in one thing. Maybe you can become self-sufficient in sprouts. Maybe you can become self-sufficient in tomatoes or potatoes or maybe onions. You can always find something that you don't have to go to the store and buy anymore. So self-sufficiency. We talked about the benefits of gardening, connecting in nature, family time. Now, there are many barriers to gardening. What are some of your barriers to gardening?
Oh, everything dies.
Everything dies. Lack of knowledge, lack of being able to do it. Yes? Yes.
Time and cost.
Time, yes. It's really, really hard to get the time. Yes.
Squash bugs.
Squash bugs. How many of you have gone out there and tried to dig a hole in your Pleasant Grove rocks? I remember when I first moved here, because I moved from, Thousand Oaks, which is Ventura County, which is like the seed growing capital of the world, where you stick your shovel in and it sinks down and you pull up beautiful soil, and it was great. So I got here, I was so excited. I tried to put my shovel in the ground, clink, I'm like, okay, that was a rock. Clink, 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 clink. Everywhere on my property. Finally, I had to pull out the crowbar and pickaxe and decided we were moving straight to raised beds. No more of that. Yeah. So there are a lot of barriers to gardening, and we're going to talk about how to relieve some of those barriers or remove them. So, number one, start small. I started with 1 tomato and then moved to 2, right? If you're going to do raised beds, do 1 raised bed. If you're going to learn how to garden, find 1 crop to start. If you try to start huge and big and do it all at once, you're going to very quickly, like the next week, become overwhelmed and give up, right? Because you're going to start seeing failures. One way to overcome barriers, the barrier of failure, because we talked about how everything dies, is to look at those failures not as failures, but as opportunities. Because now that you've done that one thing, you kind of pretty much know maybe what you did wrong, and you can either learn what you did wrong or figure out what you did wrong and learn how to do it better. So learn to use your failures as opportunities. And we're going to learn how to overcome some of this overwhelm in a minute. We talked about this a little bit earlier. When do you start gardening? Not last week, not next week, not next year, not next month, not when the emergency hits. You start to learn gardening now because it's a slow, long process. I've been gardening for over 30 years and I'm still learning. I used to be the preparedness director in California, and it would drive me insane. Nobody in California really gardened. That just wasn't a thing, right? And I would talk, we'd have the gardening talks and everything, and who has a garden? Nobody would raise their hand. And I'd say, well, when are you going to think about gardening? They'd say, when the emergency happens. I've got a property, I've got soil, I've got seeds stored. They've been in my storage for 10 years now. I'm like, okay, we need to rethink this. So it's now, right? And gardening always starts with research. What I really like gardening to start with is the nursery, right? Where you go to the nursery without a thought or a plan and you're like, oh my word, look at all these beautiful, gorgeous plants. I am going to buy them now and go put them in my ground and we're gonna have beautiful fruit, right? That doesn't work well. You have to do some research. And by doing this research, you're going to avoid some of the failures you could have and you're going to eliminate some of the overwhelm. So let's talk a little bit about what you need to research. We are going to cover right plant in the right place. All of this is going to tell you how to put the right plant in the right place. So where do you go for information? You can go to my YouTube channel, my Beginning Gardener series. You can go to the extension services. Did you know we have an agricultural extension service in Provo? Ton Bettis, he's great. He'll be able to answer a lot of questions. If you have disease or pest or just questions on our zone or anything like that, you can talk to the extension service. USU has an online extension service that is just huge amounts of knowledge and information on that site that will tell you when to plant, what to plant. You can even sign up for the USU's pest advisory emails, where they will send you an email and tell you with all of their traps that they've been doing all over the state, which pests are active and how to control them. So there's a lot of information through the extension services. You can go to your local nurseries. Now, local nurseries sometimes can be a little bit hit and miss. Now, I was a landscape designer 2 years ago. I opened my phone to see if there were any other opportunities because I was getting tired of being a landscape designer. And my job of a lifetime was just sitting there on my phone. I am now the accountant and office manager at Sun River Gardens, which is a curse and a blessing.
Yeah.
Yes, because I don't take home paychecks anymore. I take home plants. Yeah. But anyway, Sun River Gardens is, of course I'm going to promote Sun River Gardens, is a great place to go and get information. There's a ton of excellent nurseries around here that can talk to you about the plants that they sell, talk to you about what grows well here, and answer your questions. Plus, there's things like what do they call it? The USU Forestry Service has a zone map that we're going to show you in a second. There's a lot of good information. Just do not go online, Google the answer, and take anything that pops up. You need to be Utah-centric. Do not be East Coast-centric, otherwise you're going to fail, right? Okay, so before we move on, what is your purpose for gardening? Why do you want to learn how to garden? Or if you are a gardener, why do you garden? Do you have a purpose? Have you thought about having a purpose for gardening? Because that is the first thing you need to figure out before you start a garden, is what is my purpose? Am I trying to be self-sufficient? Am I just trying to learn something new? Do I want to teach my kids how to garden? Do I just, want to be outside? What is your purpose for gardening? Because that's going to tell you how far into it you need to get. For me, it's just all-consuming life experience. So as you're planning and learning, the next thing you need to just figure out is how much area do you have to garden? Because let's say you want to be self-sufficient in your groceries and not want to buy vegetables or fruit anymore, but you live on 1/8 of an acre that is mostly shaded by a large tree. You've got to reassess your priorities and rethink. I don't know if there are any more garden plots available where they have the local community gardens. That might be an option. But you have to think about the size of area that you can actually plant. Then you have to research and learn things like, what is your zone? Who knows what a zone is? A planting zone. Yes?
It's the weather and climate for that area.
Yeah.
So like your freeze time and your plant time and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
What can grow in your space.
Yeah, so a lot of people think that knowing your zone is like the ultimate end all because you're going to know everything. But what the zone actually tells you is the average minimum temperature. That's it, average minimum temperature. Let's skip ahead really quick because I want to show you this map right here. If you just Google what is my zone, it will pull up, in most of Utah now they say is zone 7, right? The way they come up with that is they have 29, usually 29, sometimes 30 years worth of data, temperature data, and they average that out and they say, what was the average minimum temperature? But how many of you have lived here longer than 20 years? How many of you feel like things have changed, but can definitely go back to what it was, at least one winter, right? So what USU has come up with, they've paired together with the Forestry Service, and they've come up with a very detailed zone map. They started with the state of Utah, and now they're doing more for the Western United States. But they take you can actually look up your city. They take the data that they have gathered from your city back 2022. It's actually on the list, how many years data they have. They give you the average minimum, then they give you the absolute minimum. How cold has it ever been, right? And then they'll give you those two zones. So when I first moved here 20 years ago, I was 100% positive we would never be anything other than a zone 5, right? Because I had seen negative 10 degrees here in Pleasant Grove. Well, now people say there's no way it could be a zone 5. We are for sure a zone 7, which I think 0 degrees is the minimum. right? You all, if you've lived here long enough, you know we're going to get colder than 0 degrees eventually, right?
Yeah, last week.
Like, yeah, it gets cold. So knowing your zone and having good data is very important. Now, with your planting zone, you know the average minimum temperature, but who knows what a microclimate is and why it's important? Microclimates are amazing. Now, I don't just love growing vegetables. My big passion is growing rare and unusual fruits, right? So I have a lot of things that don't usually grow here in Utah, like figs and hardy pomegranates and persimmons and stuff like that. I had to figure out my microclimates very carefully so that I could grow some of those things. A microclimate is an area on your property that has temperature differentials. So when you go outside, after it's snowed, you know which area of your property where the snow melts first, right? And you know where it stays most of the winter, if we actually get snow, right? That area where it doesn't melt is the coldest spot on your property. Coldest spots are usually spots down, at the bottom of a slope. They are usually hemmed in by, a building, or, it stops the cold airflow in that area, or, fences. And it's just the lowest area of your property where the cold air puddles, because cold air flows like water. It goes down to the lowest area. And just a quick example, I always thought the north side of my house was the coldest, right? Well, I decided to get fancy, and I got 3 temperature sensors just to see, because I do my YouTube channel and I also do a lot of classes. I thought, let me really know my microclimates. I put one on the top of my hill, a sensor on the top of my hill that is fully facing west, put one under my deck, which is at the bottom of my property, which I fully assumed was the coldest area, and one on the south side of my house, which is right between 2 houses and surrounded by fences, and I thought that area is going to cook. Well, I was absolutely right. The south area was the hottest area. But did you know that south area was also my coldest? So at nights, it is the coldest area, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, why is it doing that? Well, I was over there looking at my sensor, and all of a sudden I felt this cold breeze come through. And I looked up my little hill and realized that that sliver of side yard was unprotected all the way up to the mountain. All the houses were, offset enough that it was a straight shot to the mountain. All that cold air was flowing down into that spot, and then it was surrounded by fences, so it was being stopped right there. So you've got to look at your microclimates and understand them so you can, the temperature differential is in the heat of the summer, it can be 10 to 20 degrees hotter on my side yard, and at night it's always 5 to 10 degrees colder on that side area. That's the big difference. So that's what a microclimate is, and that's why it's important. You need to know that. First and last frost date. How many of you here, you don't need to raise your hands and share your guilt, but how many of you here during March, when we had that beautiful warm spell, decided to plant your peppers and tomatoes? We hope not, right? I know a lot of people who did, saying, oh, there's no way it get colder. I'm like, no, 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 no. Our last frost date is around Mother's Day. We can freeze all the way up to then and even past. Some years I've seen it past. So that's our last frost date. Our first frost date is, probably October 15th, give or take several weeks. So if you know your first and last frost date, you can avoid some of the pitfalls of gardening, where you've planned everything and then you go out and you didn't realize we had a frost at night and all of a sudden everything's dead and you're like, what happened, right? So learning these things is very important before you start gardening. You also need to know sun exposure. Most garden vegetables need 6 to 8 hours of sun a day, and you need to observe that, right? You need to go out and say, is the sun actually shining on this area, or did I think it was shining on this area and actually the fence is shading it most of the day? Anything that needs shade needs 6 hours or less. 6 hours is part shade. So there are some vegetables, you can learn which vegetables grow better in shade if you have more shade. There's some that need full sun, otherwise they're not going to produce. Another thing that I'll bet nobody has heard of is a heat index. Has anybody heard of a heat index? That's very important. If you come from somewhere like Park City or Heber, you really need to understand your heat index, which is how many days of your growing season are above 85 degrees. Because if you want to grow tomatoes, and you never hit that like 80 to 85 degrees, or maybe 10 days of the year or whatever, you're not going to be able to grow tomatoes unless you put them in someplace like a greenhouse to keep them warm. Here, it doesn't matter as much because we have a long enough growing season and we definitely get above 85 degrees. But it is important to know if you live in an area where heat might be an issue, or lack of heat, I should say. Now comes the interesting part. You need to understand your soil. Now, you could go around like I love to do and just dig in the soil and feel it and try to figure it out, and then just go online and say, what should I add to my soil to grow tomatoes, and then just add the fertilizer. Or you could be smart and get a soil test. I am a huge advocate of soil tests. You can go onto the USU agricultural site, the extension service, and or you can even just Google USU soil test labs. Their test is $45. I like to go into the home testing area, and then I like the Micros Plus test. So it'll tell you all of your soil nutrients. It will tell you what type of soil you have. Is it clay? Is it sand? Is it loam? It will tell you the pH of your soil, which is how acid or how alkaline it is. It will tell you if you have a salinity problem, which here in Utah, mostly west of the I-15 is the salinity issues. We don't have it as much here, but it'll tell you if that's an issue on your property. And it'll tell you how much, what to add if you are lacking in any nutrients. So soil testing is extremely important. So one thing you need to know, do you have sand? Do you have loam? Do you have clay? How much organic matter is in your soil? The reason you need to know these things is if you have heavy clay, drainage is hard. But it's a good type of soil to have because it holds water longer and it holds nutrients. If you have sandy soil, the more sandy it is, the less water it holds and the less nutrients it has. So you can know how to water based on your soil type. Organic matter is important to know. Now, a lot of people probably hear that you need to just add as much compost as possible into your soil, right? Well, that's not 100% true. For garden vegetables, it's a little bit better, but if you're just growing regular plants, if you get above 5% organic matter, your plants can start suffering. So your soil test will tell you how much organic matter you have and whether or not adding compost is going to be helpful. Yes?
Is that by weight or volume?
That's a good question. All I know is I read it on my soil test kit, so I don't know if it's by weight or volume. So that would be a good thing, and you could ask the extension services, and they would be able to give that answer.
Are you saying that if you take a sample of your soil, it's going to pretty much do your whole piece of land?
What you do is so I divide my property. I do 3 soil tests. I divide my property into different areas that I know the soil type is a little bit different, either because topsoil was brought in or my garden beds are a totally different soil than my front yard, which is pretty much the native soil with a little bit of compost added. And then you take a sample from like 7 different areas in that, one soil sample. So you have like 7 different tests. You mix them together, and then you send the sample in. So that gives a little bit better, view of what your property looks like.
And it's usually like a long tube, right?
Yeah, you can use a tube or you can use a shovel. The tube is easier because it gives you a clean sample. Yeah.
BYU offers that test as well.
Yes, BYU does offer that test. Yes. So BYU soil testing labs or USU soil testing labs, they both are excellent. Okay, fertilizer. Now comes the big part. A lot of people love to just go buy fertilizer and throw it down on the ground, right? But if you were smart and had your soil test kit, you know what you need for fertilizer. And that is important because there are some nutrients that are high here in Utah that if you keep adding them might end up being toxic to your plants. So let's talk about the nutrients. So there's macronutrients and micronutrients. The macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen being the most important. So nitrogen is very mobile in the soil. It can get washed out with water. Plants use it very quickly, and it can gas off into the air. Did you know our atmosphere is like 70% nitrogen? Have you ever noticed when we have a thunderstorm and there's lightning, and rain that the grass appears greener? Did you know it's because the lightning is releasing the nitrogen from the atmosphere and fertilizing your plants? Isn't that cool? So nitrogen is one that you will always need to add just because it is constantly in motion and changing. It's very important for plants' growth and photosynthesis. Then there's phosphorus and potassium. Phosphorus and potassium are very, normally very abundant in Utah soils. My tests come out as extremely high, so I should not be adding any manures or phosphorus or potassium to my soil because it could boost it into toxic levels. My garden beds are another thing. They test high, but I found if I don't add it to those garden beds, because it's not regular topsoil, it's a mix that I made myself. If I don't add it, then I have a problem growing root crops because phosphorus and potassium, they help with root growth and cellular development and water transportation and all of that. So they're important, but look at your soil test and see if you actually need to add them. Then we come to the micronutrients. Most Utah soils really have abundant micronutrients. There's very rarely any deficiencies, but your soil test kit will tell you whether or not you're deficient in them. A lot of people, how many of you have heard of iron chlorosis? Where the leaves turn yellow and you can see the green veins. They think, oh, or if you have blossom end rot on your tomatoes, that's the second thing. That's not for iron. But iron chlorosis, people think that we're deficient in iron. We are not deficient in iron here in Utah. What we have is high pH, which makes the iron unavailable to the plants. With tomatoes, blossom end rot is not a lack of calcium. It's the inefficiency of the plant in the ability to use the calcium. So people think, oh, if I add calcium to the soil, we will cure blossom end rot. That's not correct. You have to have the tomatoes not have a stress response. It's the stress response in the tomatoes, planting them too early when they get cold, or drought stressing them and then giving them too much water. That's what causes the blossom end rot. It's making the calcium the tomato unable to use the calcium that is already there. So if the tomatoes had a stress response and you're getting blossom end rot, wait for the next flush of tomatoes, and usually that second flush doesn't have them. But a lot of people say, no, it was my eggshells that I put in the ground because, they put the calcium in the ground and it got cured, right? So research, ask your extension service. If you have issues and you're thinking, do I need to add this? You can always ask. And use good information. Don't just use what you find on Facebook or online. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is natural or organic fertilizers and synthetic fertilizers. There is a lot of pushback against synthetic fertilizers. Do you know what the difference between organic fertilizers and synthetic fertilizers are?
Organic.
Organic's organic, yep. It is basically a fertilizer or a material that could become fertilizer for plants that hasn't been fully broken down yet. Synthetic fertilizer is that nutrient in the form that the plant can use it. So plants cannot use organic fertilizers immediately. You have to put it down and let the soil microbes break it down. That's why it's counted as a slow fertilizer. The synthetic fertilizer is a quick fertilizer because the plants can use it immediately. The plants cannot tell the difference once the organic fertilizer has broken down. They use it exactly the same. People talk about how synthetic fertilizers will disrupt the soil microbiome or kill the microbes in the soil. If you use too much of it, yes, it will, but follow the label and it won't. The same with organic fertilizer. If you put too much, how many of you have used blood meal before? How many of you have spilled blood meal on your lawn and then had the big dead spot? Or even any organic fertilizer and spilled it on your lawn and had the big dead spot? Organic fertilizer can kill just as much as synthetic if you use too much. Just follow the labels. I like to use both. I use the organic fertilizer as I mix it in at planting time and then maybe once in June. But if my plants are looking like that's not enough, then you can use lawn fertilizer, just some basic urea for a quick green up. And it's not harmful as long as you don't overdo it. Okay. So we talked about the micro and macronutrients. Water. Okay. One of the biggest reasons for garden failure is water. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Okay, how many of you know the difference between culinary and secondary water? Yes.
Well, culinary is what we drink, it's chlorinated, the
Yep.
secondary just comes straight off the mountain.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Exactly. Exactly.
With all the weeds.
With all the weeds, all the silt, it clogs up your, yeah. So the culinary water is treated and it's potable. The secondary water, it's less expensive to use and it's just basically water that would run off the mountain anyway. They put it in a tank and we put it on our property. The reason it's important to know if you have culinary or secondary water is because there can be issues with the secondary water. Number one, she says it comes straight off the mountain and they barely filter it, right? So, they get the weed seeds, not the weed seeds, they get the sticks and the fish and like the rocks out of it and then allow the silt and all the rest of it to come through. It could also be pretty saline because it's coming off our mountain, where it can pick up a lot of those salts, it's runoff. So if you start having issues with your plants, you might need to test your soil and see if salinity is an issue. And it could, up here, if salinity is an issue, it's the water. It's not as much the soil. Okay, so that's important to know. The next thing you need to look at before this is all before you start your garden, right? Next thing you need to look at is what type of access to irrigation do you have? Are you going to plant it in an area that's covered by your big rotary sprinklers and you're hoping that that would be good for your garden? Trust me, it's not. I mean, it can help, but it's not as good. Your pop-up sprinklers, your spray heads, is that what you're going to use to water your plants? I suggest that is also, not as good as drip irrigation, right? Now, we are in a drought. The rotary sprinklers and the spray heads are going to waste a lot of water. Drip irrigation is amazing because you can put that water exactly where you need it, and it's going to just water your plants. It's another method of weed control, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So, did you also know that you can take a regular garden zone that has spray heads and easily and quickly convert it to drip? Yes?
What is Ola?
Oh, we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's one of my favorite things. That's a good one. But
And how about wells?
whale? Oh, wells. Like irrigate
You
or
can dig a well
yeah.
20 feet deep without getting a permit.
Or do we have water that shallow?
And we have a lot of water
Yeah.
in our ground.
I would suggest researching that, but if we could have a well, I've thought about that a lot. If I could have a well on my property, I would love it.
The city may not like that.
The city may not like that because water, I am an accountant too, and one of the clients that I used to work for, they were very, very, very wealthy and had a lot of land, and they would spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting water rights on their property. Yeah, so I would love a well though. Yes, do your research. But so drip irrigation, you can go to Sprinkler World or wherever you want to go to and say, I want to convert my spray heads to drip. They will give you a little kit where you can disconnect your spray head and it has a filter and a pressure regulator on it, and then you can attach your drip hoses to it. If you don't want to do that, you can actually use a faucet. You can use one of those brass splitters, attach a clock, an irrigation clock to it, and a pressure regulator and a filter. They have those easily available, and you can just put timed drip on your faucets. So it is easy to be able to put together an irrigation system that's a drip irrigation system. If you think, oh, I'll just hand water, what happens when you go on vacation or you get sick or it's just you're too busy? Then all of a sudden, all that hard work.
You can't do anything.
Oh, you get sick and you can't do it? Yes, yes. Plan ahead. Please, plan ahead. It's very easy to put drip irrigation on your garden beds, and that will be one of the biggest benefits you've ever had. Now we're going to talk about Oyas. How many of you have ever heard of an Oya? I wish I would have put the picture up there. They are a clay pot that is very specifically fired so that it's specifically made so it weeps water into the soil. So you dig a hole, you stick this clay pot in the hole, fill it with water, and then the plant roots will pull the water from the Oya as they need it. A lot of my garden beds have Oyas in them, and I have a system where it has a reservoir, and all of the Oyas along that system are connected, and so I've connected that reservoir to my automatic drip irrigation system, and it has a float in it. So when my other drip irrigation goes on, it fills up the reservoir, the float stops it so it doesn't overfill, and then it fills up my Oyas, and I don't even have to think about it. And the Oyas are the only thing I need in those garden beds until we hit 90 degrees. Once we hit 90 degrees, they do need extra water. So every single one of my garden beds, even the ones with the Oyas, have my automatic drip irrigation. Each bed has a shutoff valve, so I just turn on that valve. And then they get both until it gets cool enough. So I don't have to think about going out and watering my garden beds by hand unless I want to. And I like to sometimes, so sometimes I'll do it, right? So irrigation is vital if you want to be successful in gardening. Hydrozone your plants. If you're going to do an automatic drip irrigation system, make sure you have plants that have the same water needs on the same system. It's best just to have your garden beds on their own system, but if you can't do that, what I've done on my property is I have my garden beds on their individual drip irrigations, but then that same system is connected to the north side of my property that has currants and hostas and water-hungry plants, just a very narrow area. That all goes off at the same time. Then it curves around to my front yard, and I have my annual bed. And it all waters with my garden beds, and they all need the same amount of water, right? So I'm able to cover more with that zone than just my garden beds. The one thing you cannot do, and be very careful of this, is put your drip irrigation and attach it to the zone where your lawn spray heads go off at the same time. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to blow out your drip irrigation system and reduce the pressure in your lawn spray heads at the same time. Drip irrigation needs to have pressure regulators on it. So just watch that. Water deeply and infrequently. I water my garden beds twice a week during the spring and fall and 3 times a week in the summer. We'll talk more about how you can make your garden beds more water efficient by choosing the right type of soil and mulching. But I turn my irrigation on, that drip irrigation is on for an hour. So it waters really deeply, the roots go deep, and then it has to sit and dry out. So that's how you can train your plants to be more water efficient. If you continuously water shallow and frequently, your plants are always going to be like, why do we need to worry about going deep? The water's just up here at the top, right? And then when you get the really hot weather, those roots right near the top of the surface of the soil are going to dry out. So, okay. Next thing you need to think about is, are you going to garden in pots? Are you going to garden in ground? Are you going to garden in raised beds? And there's different things you need to think about with each. In ground, think about the irrigation. How are you going to get irrigation there? How are you going to water your plants? Soil type, get your soil test. Figure out, your soil type. Here, it's really hard to garden in our rocky soil, but you can make mounds and get, a good, nice, foot deep mound and plant on top of that mound and, still garden basically in ground. Not my favorite way of doing it, but I've seen people make it work here. Then think about access and pathways. If you're going to be gardening in ground and you just turn the entire area into a planting bed, how are you going to get your wheelbarrow through? How, if you can't reach all the way across, what are you going to do? Make your garden mounds or beds or whatever you have in ground a distance where you can reach over them, and short enough that you don't have to walk like a mile to get all the way around the bed, right? So think about size in your garden beds and access and pathways. I love raised beds, and they are a little more expensive at the beginning, but they solve a huge amount of problems. There's less weeds, they're easier to water, they warm up in the spring faster. You can control the type of soil that you have in them, so you can have success with growing faster than you can in ground, where in-ground beds, you're going to have to amend the soil for a few years before you can actually get what you want. So I love raised beds. They do cost money, though. You can build them any way you want. I've seen people take stones that they've dug out of their yard and build raised beds out of them. You can use cheap lumber, but you're going to need to replace that. So in the long run, that ends up being more expensive. You can use really good wood beds. You can use the blocks, the concrete blocks like I've used. Or you can go with the raised metal beds. I love the raised metal beds. They're amazing. You can think about the type of soil you put in those. Don't put regular garden soil in them. Number one, you're just defeating the purpose of having a great raised bed because now you're putting your poor garden soil in there. It compacts really easily in those raised beds, and you get drainage problems, and you bring all the weed seeds with you. So yeah, you negate all the benefits by just putting garden soil, topsoil in your raised beds. Instead, you can buy great mixes in bulk or in bags, or you can mix your own. I like to mix my own. I use 1/3 peat, 1/3 compost, and 1/3 vermiculite. And as long as I use those three ingredients, that is one way that I control the drought tolerance of my beds. I don't have to water as much because the vermiculite holds water, the peat holds water, and the compost gives nutrients. So it really helps. Yeah.
What kind of compost do you use?
Anything I can get my hands on. I'll go to the nurseries and find bags of it, or I will bring it in bulk, or I will, sometimes I have my own. So just, ask the nursery and say, hey, is this a good, what's a good one? So you don't get like their garbage one. Irrigation. All of my beds have irrigation in it. It's easy. You just slide I bury the irrigation so it doesn't get pinched by the blocks. It pops it up, and then I put a shut-off valve on it and attach my drip lines to it, and I've got drip irrigation in my beds. Very easy to do. I actually have a video on it. If you do Google GardenWise Adventures irrigation, you'll pull up a bunch of videos on how to do that. Pots are another excellent way to grow. I used to hate growing in pots. Now I love growing in pots. My raised bed mix is the same as my potted mix, except for instead of vermiculite, I use perlite because perlite drains. Vermiculite holds water. And I use a little bit of worm castings and a little bit of organic fertilizer in it. And you can grow tomatoes and peppers and just about anything you want in pots. So if all you have is a little, patio, you can grow a decent amount of food and vegetables in there. Another thing and I wish I would have taken a picture of it, I love green stalks. How many of you have ever heard of green stalks? Yes, they are a garden tower that has, they have levels and pockets in those levels, but instead of the pockets being the only place you could put the soil, the entire level is full of soil. It has a hole in the center and trays between each hole. So you just fill water at the top. It drains all the way through. All of the trays have holes in it, so it waters each level. And I grow peppers and tomatoes and beans, and there's like 57 pockets or something like that in each green stalk. So it's vertical growing. And I've seen people grow potatoes and onions and garlic and everything you can think of you can grow in a green stalk. 2-foot footprint. Yes.
Does it dry out faster?
As the plants get bigger, I end up, it's a 2-gallon reservoir, and I fill it up once a day during the heat of the summer when the plants are at their full size. The rest of the year, it's like once a week. So, yep. And then if you watch that one, I would maybe this year I'll experiment with putting a little more vermiculite in those to hold water a little bit better. So yeah, I grow, besides having 17 raised garden beds, I also grow in pots on my patio. Then if you really get obsessive like me, do you know how much food you can grow indoors? And I forgot to bring I have a quart baggie full of cucumbers and cherry tomatoes that I harvested yesterday, and some peppers, all grown indoors. It can be a problem sometimes. Because the more money you spend on equipment, the more production you can get. It's never going to pay itself off in fruit and vegetables, but it's fun, right? So you do have to pay attention to light. You can grow hydroponically, which is in water, or you can grow in pots, which brings dirt into the house. But if you don't mind, then you can grow in pots indoors. So that's my grow room. As my son was moving out of the house, I was moving my grow room in. It's like, bye, see ya. And I grow everything in there. I have a lemon tree. I have, I grow peppers and lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and just, all sorts of different things. Plus, that's where I start all my seeds. Okay, so the other thing you need to think about is once you have your garden beds all set, you have the irrigation in, the soil in, you're ready for the plants, you need to think about mulching those beds, even though they're garden beds. If you are gardening in ground, wood chips are a great mulch. Straw is an excellent one. Grass clippings, as long as they don't have herbicide on them, because the herbicide will transfer. Leaves, chopped up leaves, all of those are excellent sources of mulch, or just unfinished compost or compost is a good mulch. Mulch will hold in water, it reduces weeds, and it adds nutrients as long as you use the proper kind of compost or proper kind of mulch. You do have to replace it from time to time. Even all winter, I make sure that my garden beds are covered in straw so that they are protected from erosion and everything. Weeding. Weed seeds blowing in, drying out too much. If we have a heavy storm, the soil's not splashing out, stuff like that. So it just keeps them nice. And also it's decomposing over the winter, so the soil looks better when you take, by the next spring. So weeding. If your soil test suggests that it's okay, yes. The manure has a lot of salts in it. It has a lot of phosphorus and potassium. So if those levels are high on your soil test, you do not want to be using manure compost. And you need to be careful of that. So weeding, the way to make weeding easier, drip irrigation. You put the water where it's needed and nowhere else, and weeds will dry out if there's no water. They won't completely die, obviously, but you're going to reduce the amount of seeds that germinate. Mulch deeply. Blocks the weeds, and if the weeds do land on the top of the mulch, they're very easy to pull. Weed regularly. My way of relaxing is to go out in my garden and weed after I get home from work, like 5 minutes a day, and I'm doing that as I'm seeing what's growing, and then I always feel like I don't ever weed my garden. There's no weeds, I don't weed them, but then I have to count the 5 minutes a day. That's not much time during the week. But if you save them and let them go to seed, you are going to have issues forever down the line. Know the difference between annual and perennials? Annual weeds die off at the end of the year, but they have a lot of seed that they spread for the next year. Perennials have the deep tap roots and a little bit less seed, but they will spread by seed too. Set a regular time to weed and divide your property into zones and concentrate on those zones, like once a week. Say, this zone I'll weed this week, this zone and then you can avoid the overwhelm of letting your entire property go to weeds and then have to do it all at once.
Now, it says up there mulch deeply.
Yes,
Now,
3 to
you
4
mulch
inches.
two different ways. What is deeply mulch and what is...
I usually, every time I mulch, I try to have 3 to 4 inches,
Pardon?
whether 3 to 4 inches, no matter what I use. I try to have it be deep. The only thing you have to be really careful of is I don't mulch my carrots and my onions until they get bigger, because the mulch tends to smother those out and they don't emerge out of it very easily. But yeah, you can keep it away a little bit, but like right now, all my cole crops, my cabbage and my cabbage and my kohlrabi and all of that is almost covered with mulch, because it also helps regulate the temperature of the soil. So if we have those heavy freezes, it's not going to freeze down as deep. Yes. Pest and disease control. Definitely sign up for the USU pest control emails. Do I need to stop? It's like 7:30 right now.
I know.
What do you think?
Can you kind of wrap it?
Okay, we'll wrap it up. USU Pest Advisory Board, think about diversity, plant flowers, figure out how much damage you can tolerate, because sometimes like leafcutter bees are just ornamental damage. They're not really damaging the plants. And then learn what your pests are. So those are important. Crops that grow easy in Utah, warm season crops, potatoes, high impact potatoes, lots of food, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash. Those can put a big dent in your grocery bill. Cool season crops, I grow all winter long in a low hoop tunnel that's just covered by plastic. If it gets, let's go down and show you a picture of it. These are all the crops that you can grow by season. If it gets too cold, so this is in a low hoop tunnel. If it gets too cold, I'll put frost cloth with jugs of water, clear jugs of water underneath it. The water warms up, the area a little more. And I have been able to, even when we've hit single digits, I've been able to grow the very cold tolerant crops like cabbage and kohlrabi and spinach over the winter, all winter long. Harvest in February. And that way you can actually increase the amount. Yes?
Do you recommend diatomaceous earth?
I've never seen a need for it. It can help. A lot of people do use it. So what diatomaceous earth is it's like little crushed sea creatures that have sharp, pokey edges that are just very, very fine. So it kind of scratches up the exoskeleton of insects and dehydrates them and kills them. But I found that if you plant flowers and a diverse crop, I don't have a need to really worry about pest control. The ladybugs show up and
Your butterflies and your honeybees.
yes, yeah. But it can be used.
I get squash bugs, and they kill
Yes.
the squash.
Timing.
Pardon?
Timing when you plant your squash. If you plant your squash mid to the end of June, it still has time to ripen and you miss the squash bug window. Or that's when I pull out this Liquid 7. It's a pesticide that I spray on the squash leaves preventatively. And I do that until about July, and then I don't get squash bugs. So, yeah. You pick or you just don't plant squash.
I have never had a squash.
You're lucky. You're blessed. Okay, so anyway, that is it. That's my beds.
No.
Yep. And learn to preserve. Yeah. As soon as you start getting really fanatical about garden, you're going to have enough to not only eat fresh, but to preserve. Canning, freezing, dehydrating. I grow enough that I don't have to go to the grocery store for fruits and vegetables. But it is 17 garden beds. Okay. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or are we good?
Can we have a closing prayer?
Yes,
and then whoever's got
absolutely.
questions,
I have several questions.
Good. We'll do that right after the prayer.
Okay,
Now,
can you hear me
I
now?
got grapes this last year because there was no robins,
Yes.
and it was wonderful not having robins around. And you don't see many this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing that. That was fantastic. I think this is picking it up. Is this working? Okay. Just before we have our closing prayer, I know that was a lot of information. Just take a little bit, whatever you're doing, and go to the next step.
Yes.
Don't think about the whole thing, just take the next step, okay? And for next month, we're gonna be having a cottage meeting on its emergency kits, the different kind of emergency kits, as well as making evacuation plans. So